Before, my name's Dr. Timothy Gillespie. I'm the lead pastor at Crosswalk Church, a Seventh-day Adventist church in Redlands, California. We have 5 campuses throughout the United States. But that's not the only thing I get to do. I have the opportunity to work with Blue Zones and Adventist Health as one of their faith experts on the Blue Zone side, working with community engagement and faith community engagement on the Adventist Health side and the Blue Zone side on Adventist Health. So I've gotten to be with these organizations for a little while, and it's always a pleasure to speak to healthcare professionals because I know that you're in the business of healing. And you give of yourselves in ways that I don't think any other industries can even imagine. You not only hold life and death in your hands, you also hold hope in your hands for so many of your patients and your colleagues. So thank you for what you do. And today we're talking about purposeful living. So I'm going to ask you one question, which is, why do you get up in the morning? Truly, what gets you out of bed? Ready to go to the day, to the work that gives you purpose. I wonder if it sounds something like this because I hear these kinds of conversations in healthcare. I wake up in the morning to make sure that our LDIs and our NEOs and our HCMs reflect the policy that we have housed in our Lucidoc infrastructure in order to make sure that our glide path to the playbook connects to our quality work, not only in community transformation, but also in associate well-being, with a communication cascade that stands up and includes all entities, including AHPS, AHBD, AHCS, AHCL, AHFR, AHGL, AHHF, HM, it just keeps going, AHLM, AHPL, AHRD, AHRO, AHSE, I'm sure you know what all these are, ending with AHWM, as well as the wholly owned subsidiaries, Blue Zones, Sync Health, as well as rural clinics, FQHCs, and any other BHMCs in and under our purview, and making sure that it is all reflected in EBITDA. That's what gets you up in the morning, right? By the way, healthcare has way too many acronyms, amen? Just too many. Listen, if that doesn't get you up in the morning, nothing will. Chances are this is not the case, though, right? We don't get up for these reasons. This is how we do our job, but not in our heart of hearts, not deep down in our souls. These sorts of things are how we do our job, but not why we do our job. You see, purpose speaks to our why. Why in the world would we do this work? But I think we would pick different words, perhaps. If we're talking about our why, we would probably pick words that have greater meaning and significance, more universal appeal, words that would make us happy just to say them. Words like family, meaning, joy, happiness, adventure, compassion even, healing. Words that are not so narrowly defined as in one industry or one job. Words that are aspirational as well as inspirational. Words that are what we hope to be, how we hope to live, and words that inspire us to live that way as well. Actually, these are probably the words that got us into the jobs that we have in the first place. And I have to say, being here on Tuesday and speaking with people, there are people who have worked at this place as long as I've been alive, started working here in their teenage years and are still here. That's amazing. That's incredible. It means that you've connected with your why and you don't want to leave. These why questions really speak to why did you get into this work in the first place? What were the motivating factors? Of course, money. We get paychecks. But my bet is that is not what you were thinking of when you entered into this industry. And you are in the healing and hope industry. Understand that. Don't be confused. That is what you're in. It's not just about getting a paycheck. You were thinking about those inspirational and aspirational words. You were thinking about changing the world, changing the industry, making a difference. And while you are making a difference, of course you are, there are days when the absolute grinding nature of the work that we do, with all the policies that we have to keep to and all the extra things we've had to do over the last few years, it feels like you're being ground down into bits of dust. Those things that brought us to our jobs, those words of aspiration and inspiration are the things that should sustain us, but it doesn't feel like that is always the case. It's not the job's fault. It's not your boss's fault. It's not the policy's fault. It's not the industry's fault. Often, it is the fault of us believing that we live only in scarcity. because scarcity is the enemy of purposeful living. We all understand the hierarchy of needs. We've all probably studied that at some point, understanding that on that very first level, that low level of living, we have to make sure that we have shelter, we have food, that we have safety, and we are provided that. But oftentimes we don't live above that. We don't get on to things like purpose and those aspirational words because we are just scared that we don't have enough. When we live in scarcity, we live very low-level lives, having a hard time getting to those higher aspirations, those things that fill our lives with purpose and meaning. But when we live lives of scarcity, with scarcity thinking, it creates a few things in our lives. The first thing it creates is fear, and we live fearful lives. Living in fear is overwhelming. We've all experienced this in some aspect during the pandemic, and some of us live in fear in other ways as well. But during the pandemic, we all experienced simply the fear of the unknown, not knowing what the next day would handle, not knowing what decisions were supposed to be made. I pastored a church, and when people asked me, how are you making the decisions? My answer was, I have no idea. I never knew if the way I was making a decision was even the right process of making the decision, which is not something I had ever experienced before. And I can imagine it was the same way in your lives as well. And by the way, we all deal with fear differently, don't we? Man, I used to travel with a music group that I used to play with, and there were two different members of the band, and I, for some reason, would always get sat in between them on a flight. I'm not sure why. And one would deal with his fear of flying by talking about all the ways you could die when you flew. The other one got really, really quiet. So you can imagine what would happen. The doors would close, they'd ask us to put our seatbelts on, and one would start talking about the statistics of death on flight. The other one would start praying, but not to God, praying that this guy would shut up. It became very uncomfortable. I have a tendency to deal with fear very differently. For instance, I don't really love to fly, but when they close that plane, I just put my hands up and I say, all right, Lord, I text everybody I love and I say, I hope I see you again, which freaks everyone else out, but it gives me a sense of peace. We live with fear when we live in scarcity, thinking that we never have enough. By the way, that fear has a tendency to move us towards isolation. And if living in scarcity, if these things feel like the way that we've lived our lives through the pandemic, absolutely, that is true. You mentioned that even the pieces of cloth that go between us make a difference. They do. It makes us feel just a little bit separated. Scarcity creates isolation in that since we don't think there is enough for everyone, we become even jealous of what other people have. We become selfish. And by the way, that selfishness is the same thing that starts wars. In 1933, the theologian, he was a Lutheran pastor, Martin Niemöller, was living in Germany. And he had an opportunity to go meet Hitler. Hitler was holding these kind of town hall meetings with different industries. And they brought in faith leaders. Martin went to them and he sat in the back. He didn't say anything. When he went home that evening, his wife asked him what he had learned that day. Niemöller replied, I discovered that Herr Hitler is a terribly frightened and isolated man. A life of scarcity leads to aggression, it leads to racism, it leads to classism, but it also just feeds into the fear that scarcity brings. And that has a tendency to move us towards frustration and living very frustrated lives. The idea that there's never enough. I'm worried about my position. I'm worried about not receiving benevolence from others, and I'm certainly not giving benevolence to others. Makes me sad, makes me frustrated, and makes me think that things will not work out for me, that things can't be good any longer. I mean, if you've ever really been frustrated, you know what I'm talking about. I like to play golf. That's not true. I hate playing golf, but I have to do it sometimes. I'm the worst golfer. I'm the most frustrated golfer. The good news is I use every single bit of a fairway, and every single bit of a fairway that's over on another fairway and another fairway. I use the whole golf course because I can never hit straight. But it's the most frustrating thing. And by the end of 4 hours on the golf course, nobody wants to talk to me. The truth is, scarcity is the enemy of purposeful living. When we live in a scarcity mindset, even if there is some reality to it, healthcare's having a hard time. We understand there's some scarcity. But if we live in that fear and we decide to feed into that fear, we lead very low-level lives, never being able to recognize our purpose, even if we're living it. And one of the beautiful things about working for healthcare is that the things that you put your hands to do every day bring incredible meaning and purpose into other people's lives. You are hope givers. And because you work for a faith-based healthcare system, you know that statistic that says eventually, in the long, trajectory of attrition, you will lose 100% of your patients because everyone dies. But because you work for faith-based healthcare, you have the opportunity to give people hope that transcends a diagnosis, hope that even transcends death in a hospital bed. You are truly hope givers and can live that purpose. But if you live with a scarcity mindset that we have been given over the last few years, even more so than usual, you never get to feel like you're living your purpose. But what's the opposite of purpose? Because it can't all be bad. The opposite of purpose, of scarcity, is abundance. Abundance is the belief that there is enough, that we will receive enough, and that our lives might just be fulfilled with everything that we currently have on our plates. Abundance is the opposite of scarcity, and sometimes it's just a mindset. And by the way, we don't experience abundance nearly enough. Often because there seems to be very little money in the marketing of abundance. Think about it. Every advertisement that we see is built so that we might feel a sense of scarcity, inadequacy, and fear. That's what they tell us, and then they also tell us they have the solution. Just the right toothpaste, right? Just the right drink, just the right food, just the right look. If you just have that, then you won't be living in scarcity anymore. You'll all of a sudden be living in abundance. The truth is, marketing abundance doesn't make much sense, because can you imagine a marketing campaign that had pictures of a man and a woman with jeans on, and they said, those jeans, they're perfect. Just wear those. Don't buy anything new. Nobody would buy that because they're not selling anything. But abundance is understanding that we have enough. And abundant thinking lives to a few things as well. The first thing it leads to is gratitude. When we live in abundance, even when we don't have everything we need or want, we begin our days with gratitude for the opportunity to serve, to grow, to learn, and to live our purpose. Because our ability to live our purpose comes from the abundance in which we find ourselves, we recognize that when we are full of gratitude for that which has come and for that which will come, we can begin to live our lives with expectation and awe. I was in junior high, 13 or 14 years old, not the best example of humanity, as you know. And we had gone on a ski trip with our junior high group, our middle school group. And we'd skied all day, we were tired, we were hungry, and we go back to the bus. I went to this little Christian school, so we had one of those little yellow buses that maybe would work sometimes. We get in, it's snowing, it's cold, we're tired, we're ready to go home. And our teacher sits down and he turns on he turns the key, and the bus, of course, doesn't start. And we're upset, it's getting dark, we're nervous. It's like a little bit of a Lord of the Flies situation. We're starting to look at each other saying, okay, who are we gonna have to eat before too long here? Who are the strong ones, who are the weak ones? We start to categorize one another. This happened in the first 5 minutes. As he turns the key, he finally turns around and looks at us and he says, okay, friends, that's it, it's not working. So what we're gonna do right now is we're gonna have gratitude. We're all gonna stand up, we're gonna jump up, we're gonna say, praise the Lord, thank you. And then we're gonna see what happens. And we thought, no, we're not gonna do that. We're a bunch of teenagers. We are absolutely not gonna do that. So he jumps up and does it, and that one kid who always does what the teacher says did it with him. You know that kid. If you don't know that kid, you are that kid, so. All right, he jumps up, and the teacher says, no, that's not enough. Let's do it. He jumps up, praise the Lord, thank you. After 10 minutes, we're all jumping up. We're shouting, praise the Lord. We're laughing, we're joking, we're having a great time. Beautiful moment. Living in gratitude leads us towards that. Now, I'd love to be able to tell the story that after that, he sits down and a miracle happened. He turned the key and the bus started. Didn't happen at all. We had to wait for our parents to come like 3 hours in that bus. But it changed our attitude. It changed our minds. We weren't in a scarcity mindset. We were now in an abundance mindset. We were living in gratitude all of a sudden. And gratitude gives us compassion. And when we can live with gratitude and compassion, we begin to help people in a different way. I know it's required of you by your jobs, but that's not why you got into this work. You got into this work because you wanted to care for people, because you love caring for people, because the care that you do gives people hope, and that's living your purpose. Compassion, my favorite word in all of the Bible is splagnizomai. It's a Greek word that literally means compassion. It means a movement in the guts, because that's where the Greeks thought everything happened. And so it means that you do something to care for people. Another translation of that word, splagnizomai, is the pain of love. And while it is pain to love and care and live for purpose, it's a beautiful kind of suffering that you have the opportunity to do. And by the way, living like that with gratitude and compassion moves us to expectation that things can not only or might get better, they will get better. Gratitude and compassion drives us towards an expectation that everything is possible and can perhaps come our way. We begin to live in expectation that those little serendipitous moments that some people might call miracles, these moments when our passion and our purpose run right into each other. We begin to see these things happening all the time, those happy accidents everywhere. One of my favorite songs is by a guy named Peter Mayer. He's this folk artist. And he talks about being young and hearing these stories of Scripture and how miracles would happen all the time. And they just don't anymore. And then in the song, he begins to realize, you know what? That's not true. And this is my favorite line. And I know it's weird and cheesy to read a line from a song, so I can hear the song in my head. It makes more sense to me, but bear with me. He says this: when I was in Sunday school, we would learn about the time Moses split the sea in two and Jesus made the water wine. And I remember feeling sad. Miracles don't happen still. But now I can't keep track because everything's a miracle. Everything's a miracle. And that feeling of expectation, we begin to live then in awe of what is actually happening around us. This overwhelming sense of awe that things can and will go our way, that our purpose and our passion are fitting together right in our hearts, in our jobs, in our lives. We become overwhelmed truly at understanding the incredible opportunity that we have, that has been given to us to live our lives with purpose through every part of our being. Do you remember living in awe? I don't know if you remember seeing a magician for the first time. I'm not talking about a big show. I'm talking about somebody who can just do card tricks. And you don't know what to do. I've watched my kids now when they were little, and someone would do a card trick. And this is before TikTok that gives it all away, right? Now you can figure out what's happening everywhere. But they would do a quick card trick, and the child would just go, live with that expectation and awe that things can still be amazing. This is what abundance living is. When we don't have that, we go through our lives almost as automatrons, being led by whatever entertains us, whatever gets us through to the next day. In this way, we pay very little attention to what's really happening in our lives. But purpose is paying attention to what matters most to us. As we pay attention to our families, to our passions, to our calling, we know that things can change and get better. But we also understand that purpose needs intention. It doesn't just happen, right? The first time I ever went to yoga, I went with my wife, and she said, this is going to be great. And I thought, I'm not really sure. And so I go there. We did Bikram yoga, I think it's called, where it's really hot, so you're already sweating before the thing happens. And I did the first one, and I was very confused. I went back a second time, and this yogi guru, I don't know what he was. He was this young guy who looked really good, which may have been why my wife liked going there. And he had all these wonderful tattoos and this long hair up in a man bun, quintessential. He walks in, and he says, sir, what's your intention for today? Now, this is the second time doing it, and my only intention was that I not be in as much pain as I currently was, which I don't think was what he was talking about. Purpose takes intention. Purpose needs intention. What it means is that why you're doing what you're doing needs to be thought through right from the very beginning. Every movement, the greatest things that have happened in all of history, were not accidents. Rather, they were the change that was intended. I think about Dr. Martin Luther King and what he wrote from the Birmingham jail. You realize that he had a plan. At least he had prepared with intent for some change. He says this, more basically, I am in Birmingham because injustice is here. Just as the prophets of the 8th century BC left their villages and carried their "Thus saith the Lord" far beyond the boundaries of their own hometowns. And just as the Apostle Paul left his village of Tarsus and carried the gospel of Jesus Christ to the far corners of the Greco-Roman world, so I am compelled to carry the gospel of freedom beyond my own home. Like Paul, I must consistently respond to the Macedonian call for aid. He continues, moreover, I am cognizant of the interrelatedness of all communities and states. I cannot sit idly by in Atlanta and not be concerned about what happens in Birmingham. Injustice anywhere is a threat to justice everywhere. And then he says these beautiful words, we are caught in an inescapable network of mutuality. In other words, our well-being is tied to the well-being of people around us. Our freedom is tied to the freedom of the people around us. For Martin Luther King, our justice is tied to the justice of the people around us. We are caught in an inescapable network of mutuality, tied in a single garment of destiny. Whatever affects one directly affects all directly. Never again can we afford to live with a narrow, provincial, outside agitator idea. We learn a couple things from Dr. Martin Luther King. First of all, purpose is not easy. What he endured was worth it because he was living a purposeful life. He knew where he was going. He was willing to suffer the indignity that he suffered because of the greater calling, a greater opportunity, and a greater passion for peace and justice. We should never assume that what we've undertaken in our lives as our purpose will be simple. Healing or working for a healing industry as you do is not full every hour and every minute of every day of miraculously people rising from their beds and walking. We understand that. Sometimes it is just the mundane work that you have been given. But it's important work. And in that inescapable mutuality, we realize that purpose rarely happens alone. That means that we need one another. Over the last 2 years, industries across the board have really been leaning into the idea of self-care for their associates, which is wonderful. It is a great thing. But you know the one thing that some of these self-care programs don't do? They don't bring us together. They give us respite from their work. We go to spas. We have opportunities to get food at home, some really great things. But they don't bring us back into community. And community is needed if we are going to experience shalom or peace. And that peace helps us live our purpose. That's the Hebrew word shalom, or the English word. In Arabic, it's salam. In Hindi, shanti. In Spanish, paz. In Italian, pace, or pax in the Latin. This is the idea that we are at peace with ourselves, with the divine, with others, and even with the earth, which you will experience outside. And I know I'm keeping you from that, so just a few more minutes. It also means that we experience peace in the presence of other people. The early church, coming from the Christian tradition, called it the ecclesia, the community, the congregation. People who lived their purpose together. It became important. And over the last 2 years, we have learned to live isolated lives, trying to connect digitally with one another, trying to bridge the gap that even the fabric in between us has created. But we've come out different people. I don't know if you've noticed that. It still doesn't quite feel the same. Maybe it never will, but we have to learn how to live into the new reality. And part of that is by creating around us what is often called the beloved community. The people you work with, the people you live with, the people you play with, and the people that you pray with. That is your community that can reconnect you to this concept of peace and shalom and purpose. The truth is, what you do is bring people back together in healthcare. When someone comes through the hospital, they've been oftentimes violently separated from their communities, and your job is restoration, to give them back, but you need to make sure that you've restored yourself to your beloved community. And if you don't have one, and by the way, I'm not just talking about church or faith communities. I'm talking about the people that you live and breathe with, the people that give you joy and remind you of your purpose. If you don't have one of those communities, then you have to start one. It is up to you to surround yourself with people who feel the same way you do. What is your purpose? What is your passion? How do those things connect? And then how do you find a community of people to live that together? Jobs can't be expected to do that for you. But don't think that there's not people that you work with who don't have the same passion and the same purpose and want to see that expressed in all those mundane things that you have the opportunity to do. I'll say it again. Why do you get up in the morning? What is your purpose? What is your intention? And how can you live that more profoundly? Until we reconnect with that and reconnect with others, we will still be wandering around, wondering when we're going to make it to the land and the lives that were promised to us. It's my hope and prayer that you do those simple things that bring you a sense of well-being. Blue Zones is going to engage with you. You guys, through the associate well-being, you can see the Power 9 right there. That's one way of reconnecting. 3 of those 9 things have simply to do with community. The rest, they're super easy, right? Go garden. Go take a walk. Go spend some time with friends at 5. Eat a plant slant. All these things are super simple, but what they do is they give us an opportunity to live a little bit higher than we might if we have that scarcity mentality, and it moves us towards abundance. It is my hope for you that you will find that abundance, that you will find that purpose, and that you will live it out. It will be good for you, your family, your patients. And I know that every single one of you has a calling that you want to see expressed in your life. So it is my hope that you get to do that intentionally and thoughtfully. Thank you for your time today.